The air grows thin. A chill seeps into your bones, not from the weather, but from something deeper, something ancient stirring just beyond the veil of your perception. Tonight, we gather in the quiet dark, a sanctuary for the shadows that cling to the edges of our reality. Forget the warmth, forget the comfort, and let the whispers guide you. This is Scareverse. Turn off the lights, put your headphones on, and prepare to confront the unsettling truths that lie hidden in the forgotten corners of our world. We'll explore tales where the ordinary twists into the terrifying, and the mundane becomes a gateway to the monstrous. You're safe here for now, but what you hear tonight might just follow you long after the video ends. The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the incredible amount of snow, but the single set of fresh footprints leading right up to our front door and then stopping. No return prints, just a clear path through the untouched powder, ending abruptly on our welcome mat. I was 19, home from my first semester of college, and my parents had gone to visit my aunt in Florida, leaving me to house sit for the holidays. A blizzard had hit hard overnight, dumping over 2 feet, and the whole world outside was a pristine, silent white. It was beautiful, isolating, and now unnerving. I peered through the frosted glass, but saw nothing moving in the swirling flakes still falling gently. Our cabin was pretty remote, about 5 miles down a winding dirt road off the main highway, nestled deep in the New England woods. Cell service was spotty on a good day, and after a storm like this, it was completely out. The power was still on, thankfully, but the internet had been down since midnight. I was truly alone. I figured the prints were probably from a delivery driver, maybe someone trying to drop off a package before realizing the road was impassable. But why no return prints? Maybe they'd cut through the woods, I reasoned, or driven away after turning around in our long driveway, though I hadn't heard a thing all night. I grabbed my heaviest coat, hat, and gloves, determined to clear a path to the shed for firewood. The air was bitterly cold, biting at my exposed cheeks. As I stepped onto the porch, I examined the prints again. They were definitely from a single person, maybe a size 10 or 11 boot. They walked right up to the door, paused, and then nothing. The snow was too deep to see if they'd veered off into the yard, but there were no telltale depressions leading back towards the driveway. I shook off the odd feeling and started shoveling, the rhythmic scrape of plastic on wood echoing in the hushed landscape. After about an hour of backbreaking work, I finally had a decent path cleared. I went inside for a hot chocolate, my muscles aching pleasantly. Looking out the window, I noticed something new. Another set of footprints. Fresh, just like the first, leading from the edge of the woods directly to the front porch. These were different though, smaller, maybe a woman's size. And again, no prints leading away. It was impossible. I had been outside the whole time, shoveling, and hadn't seen anyone. Had someone been hiding in the trees, watching me? The isolation suddenly felt less peaceful and more menacing. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I grabbed my dad's old hunting rifle from the closet, more for comfort than any real intention of using it. My hands shook slightly as I checked the chamber. It was loaded. I walked to the back door, peering through the glass. And there they were, the smaller footprints, continuing around the entire perimeter of the house, like someone had slowly, deliberately circled it. They didn't deviate, didn't stop. Just a continuous loop through the untouched snow, ending exactly where they began, leading back into the woods. But the unsettling part? They weren't broken by any of my own paths. They were laid down after I'd shoveled. I pressed my face against the cold pane, straining my eyes against the falling snow. For a split second, I saw it. A dark shape, almost perfectly blended with the tree trunks, standing motionless at the edge of the forest where the prints began and ended. It was too far to make out any features, but it seemed to be facing the cabin. My breath hitched in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. Nothing. Just the endless, silent expanse of white and the dark, skeletal trees. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a shadow, or a trick of the light and the swirling snow. I spent the rest of the day glued to the windows, every creak of the old house making me jump. The sun began to set, casting long, eerie blue shadows across the snow. The cabin was plunged into a deeper kind of quiet, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. I realized I'd left the shovel leaning against the porch railing. I needed it to clear a path to the generator if the power went out. Taking a deep breath, I slowly opened the front door, the rifle held tight against my chest. The shovel was gone. Just a smooth, undisturbed patch of snow where it had been. No new prints, no drag marks. It had simply vanished. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some delivery person. Someone was out there playing a sick game. Just then, the old landline phone in the kitchen, which hadn't rung in months, suddenly shrilled. I froze. Who would be calling? My parents knew the landline was barely used, and with no cell service, it had to be local. I hesitated, then slowly reached for the receiver. The ringing stopped just as my fingers brushed it. A click, then nothing but a hollow dial tone. I pulled my hand back as if burned, a new, colder fear washing over me. I didn't sleep that night. I huddled by the fireplace, the rifle across my lap, watching the windows. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The world outside was an unnerving canvas of pristine white. I slowly approached the front window. There, leading from the edge of the woods, were a new set of prints. The larger ones, size 10 or 11. They walked to the door, then continued in a perfect, unbroken circle around the entire house. Not two separate sets, but one continuous path that started in the woods, circled the cabin, and led back to the exact same spot. It was a single, unbroken loop, like a predator patiently making its rounds. I left the cabin as soon as the plows cleared the main road, not even bothering to pack. I just drove. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. The police found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being there. Just my own tracks, and the endless, silent loops in the snow. I still wonder what the person was doing, circling the cabin like that. Were they looking for something, or were they just waiting for me to come out? Every winter, when the first snow falls, I find myself checking the ground outside my window, looking for a path that leads in, but never back out. The footprints in the snow eventually fade, but the feeling of being watched, of walking in endless circles, tends to linger. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't being lost, but finding yourself precisely where you don't want to be, bound by something you can't break free from. The first thing I noticed when I looked out the kitchen window that morning wasn't the fresh snow, but the single set of footprints leading from the edge of our woods, across the yard, and right up to our back door. I remember thinking how odd it was, because no one had been out yet. My dad was still asleep, and I'd been the first one up, making coffee. The snow was pristine everywhere else, a perfect, undisturbed blanket covering everything. These prints were deep, clearly from heavy boots, and they stopped abruptly at the threshold of our back deck, as if someone had just vanished. It wasn't just a quick glance. I stared at them, trying to make sense of why there was only one set and no corresponding tracks leading back. I was staying at our family's old cabin in northern Michigan, way out in the sticks, for a solo weekend trip. I'd driven up Friday after work, hoping for some quiet time to clear my head before the holiday rush. The forecast had called for heavy snow, and it delivered. By Saturday morning, the roads were definitely impassable, and my phone had no service. It was exactly what I wanted, honestly, complete isolation. I was 26 at the time, used to being alone, and the cabin always felt safe, even if it was a bit rustic. No immediate neighbors, just miles of state forest around us. I figured whoever made the footprints would have to be local, maybe a hunter or someone who got turned around. After my coffee, I bundled up, determined to investigate the footprints. I grabbed my phone, mostly for the flashlight, and stepped out onto the deck. The air was crisp, painfully cold, and the snow was easily knee-deep. As I followed the tracks, my own boots sinking deeply beside them, I noticed something else unsettling. The prints were indeed large, size 12 or 13 at least, and they were consistent, like someone had been walking at a steady, deliberate pace. But what really got me was when I reached the edge of the woods. The tracks didn't lead into the trees or off towards any path. Instead, they made a wide, unbroken circle around the entire cabin, eventually leading back to that exact spot where they started by the back door. I walked the whole circle, slowly, shivering against the wind that picked up. The snow had piled up against the side of the cabin in drifts, making it hard to see everything clearly, but the path of the footprints was undeniable. They went all the way around, no breaks, no detours, always maintaining a roughly 20-foot distance from the cabin walls. It was like whoever made them had been meticulously surveying the property, or maybe marking it. And then, at the very end of the circle where the tracks met the ones I'd first seen, they just stopped. No exit prints. No evidence of anyone leaving the circle. It was as if a person had walked around my cabin and then simply evaporated into the fresh snow right at my back door. I spent the rest of the day feeling utterly unsettled. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a snowmobile had a very strange path, or an animal with large paws made prints that looked like boots. But the consistency, the perfectly human stride, and the way they ended, it gnawed at me. I kept glancing out the windows, especially towards the back, where the circle began and ended. As evening fell, the cabin, usually a sanctuary, felt exposed. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind against the eaves, made me jump. I kept the lights on, cooked a simple meal, and tried to focus on a book, but my mind kept drifting back to those impossible footprints. The silence outside felt heavier than usual. Around 11 p.m., I decided to head to bed. I triple-checked the locks on the doors and windows, something I never usually bothered with at the cabin. The wind was really howling now, rattling the old panes. I was just about to turn off the living room lamp when I heard it. A faint scraping sound, coming from the attic access panel in the hallway ceiling. It was a small, almost imperceptible noise, like something very light being dragged across rough wood. My blood ran cold. The attic was just storage, completely empty except for some dusty boxes. No animals could get in there, and the panel was latched from below. I froze, listening, holding my breath against the roaring wind. The sound stopped. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears over the storm. Nothing. I told myself it was just the house settling, or the wind playing tricks. I slowly walked over to the attic panel, a square of cheap plywood held in place by two small metal latches. I reached up, my hand shaking slightly, and felt the cold wood. It was secure. I even gave it a gentle push upwards, just to be sure. It didn't budge. But as my fingers brushed against the edge, I felt a faint vibration, a residual thrum that faded quickly. It wasn't the house settling. It felt like something had just been moving up there. Cold knot formed in my stomach. I didn't sleep much that night. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound a potential threat. The storm raged outside, burying the cabin deeper under snow. When morning finally broke, a pale, anemic light filtered through the frosted windows. The wind had died down, and an eerie stillness had settled over everything. I got up, made coffee, and forced myself to go through the motions. I eventually found the courage to look out the back window again. The snow was even deeper now, burying most of the existing prints. But then I saw it, something I hadn't noticed the day before, probably because of the darkness and my own panic. There was another set of footprints, lighter this time, almost like someone had barely lifted their feet, a subtle depression in the snow, directly on top of the first, deeper prints. They followed the exact same path, a perfect, unbroken circle around the cabin. And just like the first time, they led right up to the back door and then vanished. But this time I knew. I knew the scraping sound from the attic hadn't been an animal, and it hadn't been the wind. Someone had walked that first circle, then waited. And then, once I was inside, once I was settled and alone, they had walked a second silent circle. They had been in the cabin, watching me, before they left their final prints. I packed my bags that morning, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my duffel. The roads were still impassable, but I decided I would walk out if I had to. I didn't care. I couldn't stay another minute. As I left the cabin for good, I looked back at the fresh snow, already starting to fall again, dusting over the tracks. I knew with a chilling certainty that there were still no footprints leading away from that second, lighter circle around the cabin. Whoever it was, whatever it was, it had walked in a circle right up to my door and then entered, and it was still inside. Or maybe it never needed to enter at all. Some bonds are meant to last forever, for better or worse. But what happens when that connection isn't with the living, or even the dead, but with something else entirely? Something that walks beside you, unseen, unheard, yet always present. The snow had fallen so thick and fast overnight that it looked like someone had poured a giant, pristine white blanket over everything, smoothing out all the world's wrinkles. I was staying at my uncle's cabin, way up in the Catskills, for a few days of quiet before my senior year of college really kicked into gear. He usually went up there in January, but an unexpected work trip opened it up for me in late November. I'd driven the 3 hours from the city, looking forward to the silence. The cabin was rustic, just a few rooms, with a big wood-burning stove that was a real beast to get going. But once it kept the whole place toasty. I woke up that morning, maybe around 9, feeling completely refreshed. It was still snowing lightly, those big, fluffy flakes that seemed to drift rather than fall, but the ground was already covered in a good 2 feet. My first thought was coffee, naturally. My second was that I probably needed to clear a path to the outhouse, which was a short walk from the back door. There wasn't any running water in the cabin itself, so it was always a bit of a trek for anything beyond a sponge bath. I pulled on my heavy boots and a thick coat, grabbed a shovel and stepped out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, so cold it burned your nostrils, but it felt clean. I looked down, ready to break the fresh snow with my own boots, but then I noticed something odd. Right there, leading from the back door towards the outhouse, were a set of footprints. Clear as day, outlined perfectly in the new snow. I blinked, confused. I hadn't been out there yet. I was positive. I'd just woken up. My mind immediately jumped to my uncle. Had he come up early? No, he'd told me he was flying to San Francisco for a conference. Besides, his truck wasn't in the small, plowed-out parking area near the cabin, and I certainly hadn't heard anyone arrive. I walked slowly, carefully, following the prints. They were fairly large, definitely a man's size, and deep, indicating a heavy step or someone carrying something. They went straight to the outhouse, turned, and came back to the porch, ending right where I was standing. Or rather, right where I was about to stand. It was unsettling. I stared at the door, then back at the prints. There was no other disturbance in the snow, no indication of anyone else being around, no tracks leading to or from the road. Just this perfect, unexplained loop. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking, but I never had, not once in my life. And the prints were so clear, so deliberate. Not like someone stumbling around in the dark. I finished my business, shoveled a bit, and hurried back inside, feeling a weird chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I locked the back door, something I rarely bothered with way out here. Then I went to the front window, peering out at the vast expanse of white. Everything was untouched. The snow was still falling gently. I walked around the entire cabin perimeter from the inside, checking every window, making sure they were latched. Each one showed an undisturbed field of snow directly beneath it. There was no logical explanation for those footprints. The rest of the day, I found myself constantly glancing out the windows. The sun tried to break through the clouds a few times, painting the snow in a brilliant, almost blinding white, but mostly it stayed overcast. The wind picked up in the afternoon, swirling the fine powder into ghostly tendrils that danced across the clearing. I built a roaring fire in the stove, tried to read, tried to watch a movie on my laptop, but my concentration was shot. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the old cabin, made me jump. I kept thinking about those footprints, how they started and ended right at my door. It was as if someone had known exactly when I'd wake up, stepped out, made the round, and then vanished, or worse, slipped back inside without my knowing. As dusk settled, the cabin grew dark quickly, forcing me to light the old kerosene lamps. The wind howled louder now, a lonesome, mournful sound that echoed through the bare trees. I was in the living room, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous, when I heard it, a faint scraping sound, coming from upstairs. My uncle's cabin only had one bedroom downstairs, where I was sleeping. The upstairs was just a small, unfinished attic space, used for storage. It was usually cold and dusty, definitely not a place anyone would willingly hang out. The scraping was subtle, like something being dragged across a wooden floor, or perhaps a branch brushing against the roof. But it was too rhythmic, too distinct for a branch. My heart started to pound. I froze, straining my ears over the wind. The sound stopped. I held my breath. A few seconds later, it started again, quieter this time, but definitely there. It was coming from right above me. I slowly stood up, my eyes fixed on the narrow, unlit staircase leading to the attic. It was just a pull-down ladder, really. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the stove, my hand trembling. The silence that followed was even worse than the sound. A heavy, suffocating blanket. Then, a distinct, deliberate creak from the stairs, like someone was gently testing a step. And then another. They were coming down, slowly, methodically, one step at a time. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I was trapped. There was no phone signal out here, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I backed into the kitchen, fumbling for the lock on the back door, remembering the footprints. Could something have been in here the whole time? Hiding? The creaking continued, closer now. I could hear the faint groan of the ladder as weight shifted on it. I stood there, poker raised, staring at the dark gap under the bedroom door, which was only a few feet from the bottom of the attic stairs. I saw it then. A thin, dark line appeared under the door, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a shadow. It was a faint, wavering line of light, like a flashlight beam, slowly sweeping across the floorboards on the other side. Someone was definitely there, and they had a light. Panic surged through me. My options were limited. I couldn't face whatever was out there, or in there. I looked desperately around the kitchen, my eyes landing on a small window above the sink. It was old, a bit sticky, but it wasn't too high off the ground. With a desperate shove, I forced it open. The cold air hit me like a physical blow. I squeezed through, scraping my side, and dropped into the deep snow outside. I didn't stop to look back, didn't even think about my car keys, which were still inside. I just ran, plunging through the heavy snow, towards the faint outline of the road, the wind whipping tears from my eyes. I didn't know who or what had made those footprints, but I knew it had been waiting for me to leave. I don't remember much of that night, just a blur of freezing cold and numb terror, stumbling through the woods until I hit the main road. Eventually, a kind truck driver picked me up around dawn, covered in snow and shivering violently. He drove me to the nearest small town. I never went back to the cabin. My uncle had to go retrieve my things later, and he said everything was exactly as I'd left it. No sign of forced entry, no disturbed items upstairs, nothing missing. He thought I'd just let my imagination run wild being alone in the wilderness. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know those footprints in the fresh snow weren't mine, and they weren't his. They led from my door to the outhouse and then back to my door, as if whoever made them had simply melted back inside. A silent companion, a subtle presence. You start to notice the small things, the way the air shifts, a faint scent that wasn't there before, a feeling of not being alone even when you are. Sometimes the most unsettling company is the one that never truly leaves. The spare key, usually tucked under a loose rock by the porch steps, was gone. I remember thinking it was odd, but with the snow already starting to fall thick and fast, my main concern was getting inside the remote cabin my family rented every winter. I was 17 that year, sent up a day early to get the pipes checked and make sure everything was ready for the rest of them. My dad had given me explicit instructions. Don't mess with the old wood stove, use the propane heater only, and for God's sake, keep the generator fueled. The drive up had been a slow crawl, the kind where the world outside the windshield starts to disappear in a white blur. I just wanted to be warm. Inside, the cabin was freezing, the air still and heavy with the scent of pine and disuse. It was an old place, built in the 50s, with rough-hewn logs and a stone fireplace that had seen better days. I cranked up the propane heater, a noisy contraption that eventually sputtered to life, pushing out a weak stream of warmth. The forecast had called for a significant winter event, which was local speak for a blizzard that could last for days. I had brought enough groceries for a week, a stack of paperbacks, and a fully charged laptop, anticipating a few days of glorious, isolated peace before my parents and younger sister arrived. That peace, it turned out, was very short-lived. By nightfall, the snow was truly relentless. It was coming down horizontally, whipped by winds that howled like something alive in the dark. I made myself a simple dinner, read for a bit, and tried not to think about how utterly alone I was out there. The nearest town was almost an hour away, and with the roads already impassable, I was completely cut off. When I looked out the living room window, the porch light barely cut through the swirling white. That's when I saw them. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading from the edge of the tree line right up to the porch. They were too distinct, too new to be from when I arrived hours ago. My heart gave a little jolt. I grabbed my dad's heavy-duty flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, pulling my coat tighter against the sudden blast of icy wind. The footprints were definitely there, clearly defined, even with the snow still falling. They were adult-sized, maybe a men's size 10 or 11. I followed them with the beam of my flashlight, and they led directly to the front door, circled the small porch once, and then they stopped. They didn't lead back to the trees. It was as if someone had walked up to the cabin, stood there, and then simply vanished. My mind immediately jumped to some logical explanation. Maybe an animal, a deer or something, but the prints were too clearly human. Maybe a neighbor, but we were miles from anyone. I walked around the entire cabin perimeter, the snow crunching loudly under my boots. The tracks continued, circling the house, staying about 10 feet from the walls. They went all the way around, past the back door, past the small shed, and then back to the front porch again. Each step was perfectly placed, consistent, and still no tracks leading away. It was an unbroken circle of footsteps, ending exactly where it began, at the front door. The wind picked up again, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible whistling sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but the image of those circling footprints, leading in but never out, stuck in my mind. I went back inside, locking the door and double-checking the windows. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to deepen. Every creak of the old wood became amplified. I kept looking out the window, straining my eyes against the white curtain of the blizzard, trying to see if anything moved, if anything was out there. The propane heater hummed, a lonely sound in the silence. I didn't turn on many lights, just a single lamp in the living room, feeling like a beacon in the vast dark. I imagined someone or something standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, watching the cabin, watching me. The thought made my stomach clench with a cold, primal fear. Hours passed like this in a state of hyper-alertness. I must have drifted off because I woke with a start to a distinct sound. Not the wind. A soft, rhythmic rap against the front door. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't forceful, more like a hesitant inquiry. Who could possibly be out there? No one knew I was alone. No one would be traveling in this weather. I held my breath, listening. The knocking stopped. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute, it started again. Softer this time, like fingertips brushing against the wood. Just barely audible above the storm. I stayed frozen until the first light of dawn, the knocking never returning. When the sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, casting a pale, weak light over the snow-covered landscape, the storm had finally begun to ease. I gathered every ounce of courage I had and slowly approached the front door. I peered through the peephole, seeing only the pristine, untouched snow that had fallen overnight. No one was there. My hands trembling, I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly pushed the door open. The porch was covered in a fresh layer of white, smooth and unbroken, except for one thing. A perfect circle of depressions in the snow, right in front of the door, as if something had stood there for hours, its weight pressing down, without leaving a single track leading in or out. My parents arrived 2 days later, after the plows had finally cleared the main road. I tried to tell them about the footprints, about the knocking, but it sounded ridiculous even to me, just a kid spooked by being alone in a blizzard. They laughed it off, saying I had an overactive imagination. But as my dad went to get the spare key from under the rock, he stopped. He picked it up and looked at me, a strange expression on his face. "I could have sworn I left this right here last fall," he said, holding up the key. "But it was stuck in the snow, right on top of the rock, like someone just placed it there." I didn't say anything, but I knew. It wasn't where it usually was. It was where it had been left for me, right in the center of that silent, unbroken circle. These stories, like so many others, leave a residue. A lingering unease that settles in the quiet moments, when the house is dark and the wind whispers against the window pane. They remind us that the world is vast and strange, full of spaces where the familiar gives way to the terrifying, and the human heart finds itself utterly alone with something it cannot comprehend. It's the way these fears echo within us, long after the telling, that truly makes them horrifying. For a new story every week, consider subscribing to Scareverse.